Question 1. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a collision at an intersection with limited visibility due to overgrown shrubbery. As you approach this intersection in Saskatchewan, what is the most responsible course of action? Option A. Slightly reduce your speed and proceed cautiously, assuming other drivers will also be cautious. Option B. Significantly reduce your speed, actively scan for hazards, and be prepared to stop completely before entering the intersection. Option C. Continue at your normal speed as the intersection is clear from your current vantage point. Option D. Honk your horn to alert any unseen potential hazards before proceeding. The correct answer is B. Significantly reduce your speed, actively scan for hazards, and be prepared to stop completely before entering the intersection. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a collision at an intersection with limited visibility due to overgrown shrubbery. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance their immediate need to proceed with the responsibility to operate a vehicle safely and in compliance with Saskatchewan's traffic laws. The driver must make a judgment call about whether the risk of proceeding is acceptable, considering the potential consequences of an accident. The best approach involves exercising extreme caution and prioritizing safety over expediency. This means significantly reducing speed, preparing to stop, and actively scanning for potential hazards, including pedestrians or other vehicles that may emerge from the obscured area. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Saskatchewan Highway Traffic Act, which mandates that drivers must operate their vehicles with due care and attention, and at a speed that allows them to stop within the assured clear distance ahead. It also reflects the ethical obligation of all road users to prevent harm to themselves and others. Proceeding at a normal speed, while only slightly reducing speed, is professionally unacceptable. This approach fails to adequately address the identified risk of limited visibility. It violates the principle of operating at a safe speed and demonstrates a lack of due care and attention, increasing the likelihood of a collision and contravening the Saskatchewan Highway Traffic Act's requirement to be able to stop within the assured clear distance. Ignoring the overgrown shrubbery and proceeding as if visibility were normal is also professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a disregard for a known hazard and a failure to adapt driving behavior to prevailing conditions. It directly contradicts the mandate to drive with due care and attention and to anticipate potential dangers, thereby violating the spirit and letter of traffic safety regulations in Saskatchewan. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic assessment of the risk. This includes identifying the hazard, limited visibility, evaluating its potential impact, collision, and then selecting a course of action that mitigates the risk to an acceptable level. This involves prioritizing safety, adhering to legal requirements for safe driving, and making proactive decisions to prevent accidents rather than reacting to them. Question 2. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a driver experiencing a momentary lapse in attention due to fatigue, with a potentially severe consequence if this occurs at a critical juncture, such as approaching an intersection. You are driving on a highway in Saskatchewan and begin to experience symptoms like frequent yawning, heavy eyelids, and difficulty keeping your eyes focused on the road. What is the most responsible course of action? Option A. Push through the fatigue, telling yourself that you are close to your destination and can manage it. Option B. Continue driving but try to stay alert by turning up the radio and opening the windows to get fresh air. Option C. Drink a strong caffeinated beverage and continue driving, believing it will counteract the fatigue. Option D. Pull over to a safe location, such as a rest stop or a well-lit parking area, and take a break until you feel fully alert before continuing your journey. The correct answer is D. Pull over to a safe location, such as a rest stop or a well-lit parking area, and take a break until you feel fully alert before continuing your journey. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a driver experiencing a momentary lapse in attention due to fatigue, with a potentially severe consequence if this occurs at a critical juncture, such as approaching an intersection. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the driver to proactively manage their physical state and recognize the subtle signs of fatigue before it impairs their driving ability, which is a core responsibility under Saskatchewan's traffic safety legislation. The challenge lies in self-assessment and taking preventative action, which can be difficult when a driver feels they are still capable of operating a vehicle. The best approach involves recognizing the early indicators of fatigue, such as yawning, heavy eyelids, or difficulty focusing, and immediately taking a break. This aligns with the Saskatchewan Driver's Handbook's emphasis on ensuring a driver is fit to operate a vehicle and the general duty of care owed to other road users. By pulling over to a safe location and resting until fully alert, the driver mitigates the risk of a severe consequence, demonstrating responsible driving behavior and adherence to the spirit of traffic laws designed to prevent accidents. An incorrect approach involves continuing to drive while experiencing these symptoms, perhaps believing that the destination is close or that the fatigue is manageable. This directly contravenes the principle of being fit to drive and significantly increases the risk of an accident, potentially leading to severe injury or death. Such an action would be a failure to exercise reasonable care and could have legal ramifications under Saskatchewan's traffic laws. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on caffeine or loud music to combat fatigue. While these might provide a temporary, superficial alertness, they do not address the underlying physiological need for rest. Fatigue impairs judgment, reaction time, and decision-making, and these artificial stimulants do not restore these critical functions. Continuing to drive under the influence of such stimulants, rather than taking a proper break, is a failure to adequately manage the identified risk. Finally, an incorrect approach is to dismiss the symptoms as minor and continue driving, assuming that the risk matrix's moderate likelihood means an incident is unlikely to occur. This demonstrates a failure to appreciate the severity of potential consequences and a disregard for the proactive safety measures expected of all drivers. The purpose of risk assessment is to prevent incidents, not to gamble on their probability. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and adherence to regulations. This involves continuous self-assessment of their physical and mental state, understanding the potential consequences of impaired driving, and taking immediate, preventative action when risks are identified. This proactive approach, grounded in regulatory requirements and ethical responsibility, is crucial for ensuring road safety. Question 3. The efficiency study reveals that processing drivers' license applications at a rural Saskatchewan licensing office is taking longer than anticipated, primarily due to staff uncertainty regarding the interpretation of residency requirements for new applicants. A senior clerk, aiming to improve processing times, proposes a new internal guideline that simplifies the documentation needed for proof of residency, based on common assumptions rather than a strict reading of the Saskatchewan driver's licensing regulations. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing office manager? Option A. Reject the senior clerk's proposed guideline and insist on adhering strictly to the existing, potentially time-consuming, interpretation of the Saskatchewan driver's licensing regulations until official clarification is received. Option B. Allow individual clerks to exercise their discretion in accepting various forms of documentation for proof of residency, as long as they feel the applicant is genuinely residing in Saskatchewan. Option C. Immediately implement the senior clerk's proposed guideline to expedite processing, while simultaneously initiating a formal request to the Saskatchewan Government Insurance (SGI) licensing authority for clarification on residency documentation. Option D. Implement the senior clerk's proposed guideline without seeking further clarification, assuming it reflects common practice and will improve efficiency. The correct answer is C. Immediately implement the senior clerk's proposed guideline to expedite processing, while simultaneously initiating a formal request to the Saskatchewan Government Insurance (SGI) licensing authority for clarification on residency documentation. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential bottleneck in the Saskatchewan driver licensing process, specifically concerning the interpretation and application of the Saskatchewan driver's licensing regulations. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance the need for efficient service delivery with the absolute imperative of upholding public safety and regulatory compliance. Misinterpreting or misapplying the regulations can lead to unqualified individuals obtaining licenses, compromising road safety, and exposing the Saskatchewan government to liability. Careful judgment is required to ensure that efficiency gains do not come at the expense of regulatory integrity. Correct approach involves a thorough review of the Saskatchewan driver's licensing regulations, specifically focusing on the criteria for issuing a Class 5 driver's license and the documentation required to prove identity and residency. This approach prioritizes adherence to the established legal framework, By consulting the official regulations and seeking clarification from the Saskatchewan Government Insurance (SGI) licensing authority when ambiguity arises, an individual ensures that all licensing decisions are made in accordance with the law, thereby safeguarding public safety and maintaining the integrity of the licensing system. This aligns with the ethical obligation to act in the public interest and uphold the law. An incorrect approach would be to expedite the licensing process by accepting incomplete or questionable documentation without verification. This fails to comply with the Saskatchewan driver's licensing regulations, which mandate specific proof of identity and residency. Such an action undermines public safety by potentially allowing individuals who do not meet the legal requirements to operate vehicles. Another incorrect approach is to rely on informal advice or past practices that are not explicitly supported by the current regulations. This can lead to inconsistent application of the law and may not reflect the most up-to-date legal requirements, creating a risk of non-compliance. Finally, ignoring discrepancies in documentation due to time pressure is a direct violation of the regulatory framework and demonstrates a failure to exercise due diligence, which is a fundamental professional responsibility in any licensing process. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the governing regulations. When faced with a situation that deviates from standard procedure or presents ambiguity, the first step should be to consult the relevant legislation and official policy documents. If clarification is still needed, seeking guidance from the designated regulatory authority or legal counsel is essential. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are legally sound, ethically defensible, and contribute to the overall safety and integrity of the system. Question 4. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a collision at an intersection with a history of near misses and a high severity of injury due to the speed limit on the approaching road. As a driver in Saskatchewan approaching this intersection, which of the following actions best demonstrates responsible and lawful driving practice? Option A. Proceed through the intersection at the posted speed limit, relying on other drivers to exercise caution. Option B. Stop abruptly at the intersection, regardless of immediate traffic or pedestrian presence. Option C. Maintain the posted speed limit, assuming past near misses do not represent an ongoing threat. Option D. Reduce speed significantly and observe traffic and pedestrian activity closely, preparing to stop if necessary. The correct answer is D. Reduce speed significantly and observe traffic and pedestrian activity closely, preparing to stop if necessary. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a collision at an intersection with a history of near misses and a high severity of injury due to the speed limit on the approaching road. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance immediate safety concerns with adherence to traffic laws and the potential for causing disruption. Careful judgment is required to assess the immediate risk and determine the most appropriate and lawful response. The best approach involves slowing down significantly and preparing to stop if necessary, while maintaining a clear observation of traffic and pedestrians. This is correct because it prioritizes the safety of all road users by proactively mitigating the identified moderate risk of collision. Saskatchewan's Traffic Safety Act and its associated regulations emphasize the duty of care drivers owe to others on the road. By slowing down and being prepared to stop, a driver is demonstrating due diligence and acting in accordance with the principle of defensive driving, which is implicitly supported by the legislation's intent to prevent accidents. This action directly addresses the moderate likelihood of a collision by reducing the driver's speed and increasing their reaction time, and it prepares them for the high severity of potential injury by ensuring they can avoid or minimize an impact. An incorrect approach would be to maintain speed and assume other drivers will yield, or that the near misses are not indicative of a persistent danger. This is professionally unacceptable because it disregards the explicit information from the risk matrix indicating a moderate likelihood of a collision, fails to uphold the driver's duty of care, and could lead to an accident, violating the spirit and letter of traffic safety laws in Saskatchewan. Another incorrect approach would be to stop abruptly without any immediate necessity, such as a pedestrian or another vehicle entering the intersection. This is professionally unacceptable as it could create a hazard for following vehicles and is an unnecessary disruption to traffic flow. While safety is paramount, actions must be proportionate to the assessed risk and in accordance with traffic regulations that govern stopping and yielding. A final incorrect approach would be to proceed through the intersection at the posted speed limit, relying solely on the assumption that the near misses are isolated incidents and not representative of a systemic risk. This is professionally unacceptable because it ignores the data presented in the risk matrix, which clearly flags a moderate likelihood of a collision. It demonstrates a lack of proactive risk management and a failure to exercise the caution required by the identified conditions. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that involves 1. Risk identification, recognizing and understanding the potential hazards presented, e.g., intersection near misses, speed limit. 2. Risk assessment, evaluating the likelihood and severity of potential outcomes based on available information, the risk matrix. 3. Risk mitigation, selecting and implementing the most appropriate and lawful actions to reduce the identified risks. 4. Continuous monitoring, remaining vigilant and adjusting actions as the situation evolves. Question 5. Stakeholder feedback indicates that new drivers sometimes inquire about how to access their official driving records in Saskatchewan. An employee at a government service center, while processing other transactions, is approached by a new driver who asks, "Can you just quickly look up my driving record for me? I need to see if there are any points on it before I apply for insurance." What is the most appropriate and compliant course of action for the employee to take? Option A. Advise the driver that you are unable to assist with this request and suggest they contact SGI themselves without providing any further direction. Option B. Provide a general explanation of what a driving record typically contains, including common reasons for points, without attempting to access their specific record. Option C. Use your internal system access to quickly look up the driver's record to confirm if there are any points, as this will save the driver time and is a common request. Option D. Inform the driver that you cannot directly access their personal driving record, but can provide them with instructions on how to request it through the official Saskatchewan Government Insurance (SGI) portal or by visiting an SGI service center. The correct answer is D. Inform the driver that you cannot directly access their personal driving record, but can provide them with instructions on how to request it through the official Saskatchewan Government Insurance (SGI) portal or by visiting an SGI service center. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect personal information. A new driver, potentially stressed or unfamiliar with the process, is seeking assistance. The challenge lies in providing helpful guidance without inadvertently disclosing information that could compromise their privacy or violate the Saskatchewan driver's licensing and vehicle registration regulations. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions are compliant and uphold public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves guiding the individual to the appropriate official channels for obtaining their driving record. This approach respects the privacy of the driver and adheres to the Saskatchewan driver's licensing and vehicle registration regulations, which govern access to such information. By directing them to the Saskatchewan Government Insurance (SGI) or the official online portal, the employee ensures that the driver receives accurate information through a secure and authorized process, preventing any unauthorized disclosure of personal data. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves attempting to access the driver's record directly using internal systems or personal knowledge. This is a significant breach of privacy and violates the Saskatchewan driver's licensing and vehicle registration regulation. Such actions could lead to disciplinary action, including termination and potential legal consequences for unauthorized access to personal information. Another incorrect approach is to provide a general overview of what might be on a driving record without confirming the specific details or offering to retrieve it. While seemingly helpful, this can lead to misinformation if the general overview doesn't accurately reflect the individual's specific record. It also fails to address the driver's direct request for their own record and bypasses the proper, secure channels for obtaining it, potentially creating a false sense of security or understanding. A third incorrect approach is to dismiss the request outright without offering any alternative or guidance. This demonstrates a lack of customer service and fails to uphold the professional responsibility to assist individuals within the bounds of the law and regulations. While not a direct violation of privacy, it is unprofessional and unhelpful. Professional reasoning. professionals should always prioritize adherence to relevant regulations and ethical guidelines. When faced with a request that involves personal information, the decision-making process should involve 1. Identifying the nature of the information requested and its sensitivity. 2. Recalling or consulting the specific regulations governing access to such information. In this case, Saskatchewan drivers' licensing and vehicle registration regulations. 3. Determining the authorized and secure methods for obtaining or verifying the information. 4. Providing clear, compliant guidance to the individual, directing them to the appropriate resources or processes. If unsure, seeking guidance from a supervisor or the relevant regulatory body is always the safest course of action. Question 6. The performance metrics show a new driver applicant in Saskatchewan consistently hesitating and misjudging gaps when attempting left turns at various intersections during their road test, leading to several near misses with oncoming traffic. The examiner has observed a pattern of delayed reactions and insufficient observation of opposing vehicles. What is the most professionally responsible course of action for the examiner in this situation? Option A. Pass the applicant, noting the difficulties with left turns in the feedback, with the expectation that they will gain experience and improve over time. Option B. Pass the applicant, attributing the near misses to the aggressive driving of other motorists and the applicant's understandable nervousness. Option C. Focus only on whether a collision occurred, and since no collision happened, pass the applicant with a recommendation to practice left turns more frequently. Option D. Fail the applicant for demonstrating a consistent inability to safely execute left turns, a critical driving maneuver, thereby compromising public safety. The correct answer is D. Fail the applicant for demonstrating a consistent inability to safely execute left turns, a critical driving maneuver, thereby compromising public safety. Explanation. The performance metrics show a concerning trend in a new driver's ability to safely navigate intersections, particularly during left turns. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the examiner to balance the need to assess the driver's readiness for independent driving with the paramount responsibility of public safety. A driver who demonstrates consistent difficulty in a critical maneuver like left turns at intersections poses a significant risk to themselves and others on Saskatchewan roadways. The examiner must make a judgment call that is not only based on the strict criteria of the Saskatchewan Driver's Handbook, but also on a professional assessment of the driver's overall competence and potential for improvement. The best approach involves a thorough evaluation of the driver's performance during the entire road test, with a specific focus on the recurring issue of left turns. This includes observing not just the outcome of the maneuver, e.g., whether a collision occurred, but the underlying decision-making process, reaction times, gap assessment, and control of the vehicle. If the driver consistently demonstrates a lack of judgment, poor observation, or inadequate vehicle control during these critical moments, even if no incident occurred, it indicates a fundamental deficiency that compromises safety. In such cases, failing the driver is the only responsible course of action, as it directly aligns with the Saskatchewan Highway Traffic Act and the Ministry of Highways and Infrastructure's mandate to ensure all licensed drivers meet a minimum standard of safety. This approach prioritizes public safety over the immediate desire of the applicant to pass the test. An incorrect approach would be to pass the driver despite repeated errors in left turn execution, perhaps due to a desire to avoid confrontation or a misinterpretation of the severity of the errors. This fails to uphold the regulatory requirement for safe driving practices and could lead to future accidents. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on whether a collision occurred, ignoring the dangerous decision-making or near misses that preceded it. The Saskatchewan Highway Traffic Act emphasizes proactive safety, not just reactive outcomes. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to solely blame external factors, e.g., other drivers' actions, without critically assessing whether the applicant's own actions contributed to or exacerbated the dangerous situation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the Saskatchewan Driver's Handbook and the Highway Traffic Act. This framework involves objective observation and recording of all maneuvers, followed by a critical assessment of the driver's decision-making process, risk perception, and vehicle control. When a pattern of unsafe behavior emerges, especially in high-risk situations like intersection, the professional must weigh the potential consequences of licensing an unsafe driver against the applicant's immediate desire to pass. The ultimate decision must be grounded in the principle of public safety, even if it means failing the applicant. Question 7. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a collision at an intersection with limited sightlines, coupled with a high severity of potential injury due to the speed limit on the approaching road. As you approach this intersection in Saskatchewan, what is the most prudent course of action? Option A. Stop completely at the intersection regardless of traffic conditions or the presence of a stop sign. Option B. Maintain your current speed and perform a brief glance at the intersection before proceeding, relying on your right-of-way. Option C. Accelerate through the intersection to clear it quickly, assuming speed will prevent other vehicles from entering your path. Option D. Slow down significantly, scan thoroughly for hazards from all directions, and be prepared to stop if necessary, even if you have the right-of-way. The correct answer is D. Slow down significantly, scan thoroughly for hazards from all directions, and be prepared to stop if necessary, even if you have the right-of-way. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a collision at an intersection with limited sightlines, coupled with a high severity of potential injury due to the speed limit on the approaching road. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance adherence to traffic laws with proactive risk mitigation in a dynamic environment. The driver must not only react to immediate conditions, but also anticipate potential hazards based on the intersection's characteristics and the surrounding traffic. Careful judgment is required to determine the safest course of action when faced with uncertainty. The best approach involves slowing down significantly as you approach the intersection, scanning thoroughly for any potential hazards from all directions, and being prepared to stop if necessary, even if you have the right-of-way. This aligns with Saskatchewan's traffic laws, specifically the Traffic Safety Act, which mandates that drivers operate their vehicles in a safe and responsible manner, exercising due care and attention. This proactive approach prioritizes safety by acknowledging the inherent risks associated with limited sightlines and high-speed approaches, ensuring the driver can react appropriately to any unexpected situations, thereby minimizing the likelihood of a collision and its potential severity. An incorrect approach would be to maintain your current speed and only glance briefly at the intersection before proceeding, assuming the right-of-way guarantees safety. This fails to acknowledge the increased risk posed by limited sightlines and the potential for other drivers to disregard traffic signals or signs. Such an action violates the principle of exercising due care and attention, as mandated by Saskatchewan law, and could lead to a collision. Another incorrect approach is to stop completely at the intersection, regardless of traffic conditions or whether there is a stop sign. While stopping might seem inherently safe, it can create unexpected hazards for following traffic and may be unnecessary if a thorough scan reveals the intersection is clear. This deviates from the principle of operating a vehicle in a safe and efficient manner, as it can disrupt traffic flow without a clear safety justification in this specific scenario. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to accelerate through the intersection to clear it quickly, believing that speed will prevent other vehicles from entering your path. This is extremely dangerous, especially with limited sightlines, as it significantly increases the risk of a high-impact collision if another vehicle does enter the intersection unexpectedly. This action directly contravenes the requirement to operate a vehicle safely and responsibly, prioritizing speed over a comprehensive assessment of risk. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential hazards, assessing their likelihood and severity, as indicated by the risk matrix, and then selecting the safest course of action that complies with all applicable traffic laws and ethical obligations to protect themselves and others. This involves a continuous process of observation, evaluation, and adjustment of driving behavior. Question 8. Market research demonstrates that many drivers struggle with right-of-way scenarios at uncontrolled intersections, especially when unexpected elements are introduced. Imagine you are driving in Regina, Saskatchewan, approaching an uncontrolled intersection. You are the first vehicle to reach the intersection. As you prepare to proceed, you see a police car approaching from your left, with its emergency lights flashing. What is the safest and most legally compliant action to take? Option A. Yield to the police vehicle and allow it to pass through the intersection first. Option B. Stop and wait for the police vehicle to pass, then remain stopped indefinitely. Option C. Signal the police vehicle to proceed by waving them through. Option D. Proceed through the intersection as you were the first to arrive. The correct answer is A. Yield to the police vehicle and allow it to pass through the intersection first. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to demonstrate an understanding of Saskatchewan's specific traffic laws regarding right-of-way at uncontrolled intersections, particularly when faced with a situation that deviates from the standard first to arrive rule. The presence of a police vehicle introduces an element of urgency and potential confusion, demanding a clear prioritization of safety and adherence to established procedures over assumptions. Careful judgment is required to correctly interpret the situation and act in a manner that ensures the safety of all road users. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves yielding to the police vehicle. This approach is correct because Section 30 of the Traffic Safety Act of Saskatchewan and associated regulations generally grant emergency vehicles, including police vehicles, the right-of-way when their emergency lights and slash or sirens are activated. Even at an uncontrolled intersection, the presence of an activated emergency vehicle supersedes standard right-of-way rules. The applicant must recognize the visual and auditory cues of an emergency vehicle and prioritize yielding to allow it to proceed unimpeded, ensuring public safety and facilitating the emergency response. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding through the intersection as the first vehicle to arrive at the uncontrolled intersection would be an incorrect approach. While this is the standard rule for uncontrolled intersection, it fails to account for the presence of an activated emergency vehicle, which has a legal right-of-way that overrides general traffic rules. This action could lead to a collision and impede an emergency response. Attempting to signal the police vehicle to proceed by waving them through is also an incorrect approach. This action assumes the applicant has the authority to direct traffic and could lead to miscommunication or a misunderstanding of intentions, potentially creating a hazardous situation. The applicant's role is to yield, not to direct. Stopping indefinitely and waiting for the police vehicle to pass without making any attempt to proceed when safe would be an inefficient and potentially disruptive approach. While yielding is paramount, once the emergency vehicle has safely passed and the intersection is clear, the applicant should proceed cautiously, adhering to all other traffic laws. This prolonged stop could unnecessarily impede traffic flow. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and adherence to specific traffic legislation. This involves 1. Immediate identification of potential hazards and emergency situations. 2. Recognition of legal obligations and rights, particularly concerning emergency vehicles as defined by Saskatchewan's Traffic Safety Act. 3. Prioritization of actions that ensure the safety of oneself and others. 4. Application of learned driving principles in a dynamic environment, understanding that specific circumstances can alter standard rules. Question 9. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a collision at an intersection with limited sightlines, coupled with a high severity of potential injury due to the speed limit on the approaching road. As a driver approaching this intersection in rural Saskatchewan, what is the most appropriate immediate action to take? Option A. Honk the horn continuously to alert any potential oncoming traffic. Option B. Reduce speed significantly. Scan actively for other road users and be prepared to stop. Option C. Maintain current speed and attempt to proceed through the intersection quickly. Option D. Stop abruptly at the intersection without looking for other traffic. The correct answer is B. Reduce speed significantly, scan actively for other road users, and be prepared to stop. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a collision at an intersection with limited sightlines, coupled with a high severity of potential injury due to the speed limit on the approaching road. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance immediate safety concerns with adherence to traffic laws and the need to maintain traffic flow. Careful judgment is required to assess the dynamic environment and make a timely, safe decision. The best approach involves slowing down significantly, preparing to stop if necessary, and actively scanning for other road users. This is correct because Saskatchewan's Highway Traffic Act emphasizes the duty of care for all drivers to operate their vehicles safely and to be prepared to stop to avoid a collision. Specifically, Section 127 of the Act requires drivers to drive in a manner that is safe for the conditions, which includes reduced speed and increased vigilance when visibility is impaired or approaching potentially hazardous situations like intersections with limited sightlines. This proactive approach prioritizes the prevention of harm, aligning with the fundamental ethical obligation of a driver to protect themselves and others. An incorrect approach would be to maintain speed and attempt to beat any potential oncoming traffic. This fails to acknowledge the moderate likelihood of a collision indicated by the risk matrix and the high severity of potential injury. It directly contravenes the duty of care to drive safely for the conditions and the requirement to be prepared to stop. Ethically, it prioritizes personal convenience or perceived efficiency over the safety of others. Another incorrect approach would be to stop abruptly at the intersection without assessing oncoming traffic. While stopping is a component of safety, an abrupt stop without observation can create a hazard for following vehicles and may not be necessary if a safe passage is available after proper observation. This demonstrates a lack of dynamic risk assessment and fails to apply the principle of proportionate response to the identified risk. A professional driver should employ a decision-making framework that involves 1. Hazard identification, recognizing the limited sightlines and potential for conflict. 2. Risk assessment, evaluating the likelihood and severity of potential harm based on the risk matrix and environmental factors. 3. Decision-making, choosing the safest course of action that balances safety with traffic flow, prioritizing the avoidance of collision. 4. Execution, implementing the chosen action with precision and awareness. Question 10. The risk matrix shows that the current road conditions are clear and dry, and the traffic flow is moderate. You are driving at a constant speed of 80 km/h on a highway in Saskatchewan. The vehicle directly in front of you is traveling at the same speed. Using the 2-second rule as a baseline for safe following distance, what is the minimum safe distance you should maintain behind the vehicle ahead? Option A. Maintain a distance of 20 meters. Option B. Maintain a distance of at least 4 meters. Option C. Maintain a distance of 1 second. Option D. Maintain a distance of 30 meters. The correct answer is B. Maintain a distance of at least 4 meters. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the driver to accurately interpret and apply Saskatchewan's traffic laws regarding speed limits and safe following distances in a dynamic environment. Misinterpreting these rules can lead to dangerous situations, including collisions, and result in penalties such as fines and demerit points, impacting driving privileges. The driver must balance the need to maintain traffic flow with the absolute priority of safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves calculating the minimum safe following distance based on the current speed and then comparing it to the actual distance. In Saskatchewan, the 2-second rule is a widely accepted guideline for safe following distance under normal conditions. To apply this, the driver identifies a fixed object the vehicle ahead passes, then counts 1001, 1002. If the driver reaches the object before finishing the count, they are following too closely. At 80 km/h, this translates to a distance of approximately 4 meters. If the driver's actual following distance is greater than or equal to this calculated distance, they are maintaining a safe gap. This approach directly adheres to Saskatchewan's emphasis on defensive driving and maintaining safe distances as outlined in the Saskatchewan Driver's Handbook, which prioritizes preventing collisions. Incorrect approaches analysis. Following the vehicle ahead at a fixed distance regardless of speed is professionally unacceptable because it fails to account for the increased stopping distance required at higher speeds. At 80 km/h, a fixed distance that might be safe at 50 km/h would be dangerously insufficient. This violates the principle of adjusting driving to conditions, a core tenet of safe driving. Assuming that maintaining a distance of 1 second is adequate because the traffic is moving quickly is professionally unacceptable. The 1-second rule is generally considered insufficient even in ideal conditions and is significantly below the recommended 2-second rule for Saskatchewan. This approach prioritizes speed over safety, directly contravening regulatory guidance. Focusing solely on the speed limit posted and not considering the distance to the vehicle ahead is professionally unacceptable. While adhering to the speed limit is mandatory, it does not absolve the driver of the responsibility to maintain a safe following distance. Speed and distance are interconnected factors in collision avoidance, and neglecting one for the other creates a hazardous situation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic approach to driving that prioritizes safety and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Understanding and internalizing Saskatchewan's traffic laws and defensive driving principles. 2. Continuously assessing the driving environment, including speed, road conditions, and the behavior of other drivers. 3. Applying established safety guidelines, such as the 2-second rule, and performing necessary calculations to ensure safe following distances. 4. Adjusting driving behavior proactively to mitigate risks, rather than reactively to avoid immediate danger. Question 11. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a collision at a specific intersection due to frequent speeding and a high consequence of serious injury. As you approach this intersection in Saskatchewan, what is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Maintain your current speed but remain highly alert, relying on your driving experience to react to any dangers. Option B. Slightly reduce your speed but continue through the intersection without significant alteration to your driving pace. Option C. Disregard the risk matrix assessment and proceed through the intersection at your intended speed, assuming the assessment is overly cautious. Option D. Immediately reduce your speed to the posted limit and increase your vigilance, scanning for potential hazards. The correct answer is D. Immediately reduce your speed to the posted limit and increase your vigilance, scanning for potential hazards. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a collision at a specific intersection due to frequent speeding and a high consequence of serious injury. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to balance their immediate need to reach their destination with the significant safety risks identified. Careful judgment is required to prioritize safety over expediency, adhering to Saskatchewan's traffic laws and the principles of defensive driving. The best approach involves immediately reducing speed to the posted limit and increasing vigilance. This is correct because it directly addresses the identified risks of speeding and potential collisions. Saskatchewan's Traffic Safety Act mandates adherence to speed limits and requires drivers to operate their vehicles in a safe manner, considering road conditions and potential hazards. By reducing speed, the driver gains more time to react to unexpected events, thereby mitigating the likelihood of a collision and reducing the potential severity of any incident. This proactive measure aligns with the ethical responsibility of all road users to protect themselves and others. An incorrect approach would be to maintain the current speed, assuming personal driving skill can compensate for the risk. This is professionally unacceptable as it disregards the objective risk assessment and the explicit legal requirement to obey speed limits. It demonstrates a failure to acknowledge the inherent unpredictability of traffic and road conditions, violating the principle of defensive driving. Another incorrect approach would be to only slightly reduce speed, but remain alert. Alertness is crucial. A slight reduction may not be sufficient to adequately mitigate the moderate likelihood of a collision given the high consequence of injury. This approach fails to fully address the identified risk factors and may still place the driver and others in undue danger, contravening the duty of care. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to ignore the risk matrix and proceed as normal, perhaps believing the assessment is overly cautious. This is professionally unacceptable, as it demonstrates a complete disregard for established safety protocols and risk management. It shows a lack of respect for the potential consequences and a failure to uphold the responsibility to drive safely, which is a cornerstone of road user conduct in Saskatchewan. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and legal compliance. This involves 1. Acknowledging and understanding the identified risks. 2. Evaluating potential actions against legal requirements and safety best practices. 3. Selecting the action that most effectively mitigates risk and adheres to regulations. 4. Continuously reassessing the situation and adjusting actions as needed. Question 12. The monitoring system demonstrates a vehicle being operated on a Saskatchewan highway. Upon initiating a traffic stop, the driver states that they have a valid Saskatchewan driver's license but have unfortunately lost it and do not have it with them. What is the most appropriate course of action for the enforcement officer to take? Option A. Request the driver to produce their valid Saskatchewan driver's license or other acceptable proof of authorization to drive. Option B. Allow the driver to proceed with a verbal warning, trusting their statement that they possess a valid license. Option C. Immediately issue a ticket for driving without a license and impound the vehicle. Option D. Accept the driver's explanation and allow them to continue their journey without further inquiry. The correct answer is A. Request the driver to produce their valid Saskatchewan driver's license or other acceptable proof of authorization to drive. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a potential conflict between a driver's immediate need to operate a vehicle and the legal requirement to possess a valid Saskatchewan driver's license. The driver's claim of a lost license, while potentially true, does not automatically grant them the right to drive without proof of authorization. The enforcement officer must balance the need for public safety and adherence to traffic laws with the practicalities of a driver's situation. Careful judgment is required to avoid both undue leniency that could compromise safety and overly harsh enforcement that might unfairly penalize a driver who is otherwise law-abiding. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice in this situation is to require the driver to produce a valid Saskatchewan driver's license or other acceptable proof of authorization to drive. This approach aligns directly with the Traffic Safety Act of Saskatchewan and its associated regulations, which mandate that a person must hold a valid driver's license to operate a motor vehicle on public roads. The law does not provide an exemption for a lost license. Rather, it requires the driver to have the license in their possession or be able to otherwise prove their entitlement to drive. This ensures that only authorized individuals are operating vehicles, thereby upholding public safety and the integrity of the licensing system. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to accept the driver's verbal assurance that they have a valid license and allow them to proceed without further verification. This fails to uphold the legal requirement of possessing a valid license while operating a vehicle, bypasses the established regulatory framework designed to ensure driver competency and authorization, potentially putting other road users at risk. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately issue a ticket for driving without a license, without considering any possibility of the driver having a valid license that was simply misplaced. While the driver must be able to produce it, a complete disregard for the possibility of a valid license being held, without any attempt at verification or understanding the circumstances, could be seen as overly punitive and not reflective of professional judgment. A further incorrect approach would be to confiscate the vehicle based solely on the driver's statement of a lost license. The Traffic Safety Act outlines specific circumstances for vehicle impoundment, and a lost license, without evidence of other offenses or a history of noncompliance, typically does not meet these criteria. This action would be an overreach of authority and a failure to adhere to the prescribed legal procedures. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should follow a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to the law while employing reasonable judgment. This involves 1. Identifying the core legal requirement, possession of a valid license. 2. Assessing the driver's statement against this requirement. 3. Seeking verifiable proof of compliance. 4. Applying the law consistently and fairly, considering any mitigating circumstances within the bounds of the regulations. If proof cannot be provided, then the appropriate enforcement action, as dictated by the Traffic Safety Act, should be taken. Question 13. During the evaluation of a new driver's road test in Saskatchewan, you approach an uncontrolled intersection where another vehicle arrives at the same time as you, approaching from your left. The other vehicle is also proceeding straight. What is the correct action to take according to Saskatchewan traffic laws? Option A. Stop in the middle of the intersection to assess the situation further. Option B. Honk your horn to alert the other driver to your presence and then proceed. Option C. Proceed through the intersection first, as you are proceeding straight and have the right-of-way. Option D. Yield the right-of-way to the vehicle on your left, as it has priority at an uncontrolled intersection when arriving simultaneously. The correct answer is D. Yield the right-of-way to the vehicle on your left, as it has priority at an uncontrolled intersection when arriving simultaneously. Explanation. During the evaluation of a new driver's ability to safely operate a vehicle in Saskatchewan, a scenario arises that tests the applicant's understanding of right-of-way rules at an uncontrolled intersection. This situation is professionally challenging because the examiner must assess not only the applicant's knowledge of the Saskatchewan Highway Traffic Act, but also their ability to apply that knowledge in a dynamic, real-world situation where judgment and anticipation are crucial. Misinterpreting right-of-way can lead to dangerous situations and potential collisions, making accurate assessment paramount. The correct approach involves the applicant demonstrating a clear understanding that at an uncontrolled intersection in Saskatchewan, the vehicle that arrives first has the right-of-way. If two vehicles arrive at approximately the same time, the vehicle on the right has the right-of-way. This principle is directly derived from Section 44 of the Saskatchewan Highway Traffic Act, which outlines rules for intersections. The applicant must actively scan for other vehicles, assess their arrival times, and yield accordingly, demonstrating a proactive and safe driving behavior. An incorrect approach would be for the applicant to assume they have the right-of-way simply because they are proceeding straight, regardless of when other vehicles arrived or their position. This fails to adhere to the Saskatchewan Highway Traffic Act's explicit rules for uncontrolled intersections and demonstrates a dangerous lack of situational awareness. Another incorrect approach would be to proceed without checking for oncoming traffic from the left, thereby ignoring the rule that the vehicle on the right has priority when arrival times are simultaneous. This demonstrates a critical failure to observe and obey traffic laws. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to stop completely in the intersection, blocking traffic, even if they technically had the right-of-way, as this impedes the flow of traffic and can create confusion and hazards, which is not in line with safe and efficient driving practices. Professionals making these assessments should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and adherence to the Saskatchewan Highway Traffic Act. This involves observing the applicant's actions, comparing them against established legal requirements and safe driving practices, and making a judgment based on whether the applicant consistently demonstrates an understanding and application of these principles. The focus should be on whether the applicant can anticipate potential hazards and react appropriately according to the law. Question 14. What factors determine the appropriate course of action when a Saskatchewan resident, known to be experiencing a new onset of significant tremors and occasional disorientation, expresses a desire to drive home from a social gathering? Option A. Assuming the individual will self-regulate their driving based on their personal assessment of their condition. Option B. Immediately reporting the observed symptoms and concerns to Saskatchewan Government Insurance, SGI, for a medical review. Option C. Advising the individual to simply refrain from driving without formally notifying any regulatory body. Option D. Directly confronting the individual and demanding they surrender their driver's license. The correct answer is B. Immediately reporting the observed symptoms and concerns to Saskatchewan Government Insurance, SGI, for a medical review. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves a driver who is experiencing a medical condition that could impair their ability to operate a vehicle safely. The core challenge lies in balancing the individual's desire to drive with the paramount responsibility of public safety, as mandated by Saskatchewan's traffic laws and the Saskatchewan Government Insurance, SGI, regulations. A driver's license is a privilege, not a right, and its continued possession is contingent upon meeting specific health and competency standards. The need for immediate action without compromising due process or unfairly penalizing the individual requires careful judgment. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves immediately reporting the observed symptoms and concerns to SGI. This aligns with the Saskatchewan Driver's Licensing and Vehicle Registration Act and related SGI policies, which place a responsibility on individuals, and by extension, those who observe potential impairment, to report conditions that may affect driving ability. SGI has established procedures for medical review and assessment, which are designed to fairly evaluate a driver's fitness to operate a vehicle. By reporting, you initiate a formal process that allows SGI to gather necessary medical information and make an informed decision, thereby upholding public safety while respecting the individual's rights within the regulatory framework. This approach prioritizes the safety of all road users by proactively addressing a potential hazard. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to ignore the situation and assume the individual will manage their condition. This fails to meet the ethical and regulatory obligation to report potential safety risks. The Saskatchewan Driver's Licensing and Vehicle Registration Act implicitly requires drivers to be medically fit, and allowing someone with observable symptoms that could impair driving to continue doing so creates a direct risk to public safety, which is a serious regulatory failure. Another incorrect approach is to directly confront the individual and demand they surrender their license. While well-intentioned, this bypasses the established SGI procedures for medical assessment. It can lead to conflict, may not result in a formal resolution, and does not ensure that the individual undergoes the necessary medical evaluation by qualified professionals as required by SGI. This approach lacks the regulatory authority and procedural correctness to effectively address the situation. A further incorrect approach is to advise the individual to simply stop driving without involving SGI. While this might seem like a practical solution, it does not formally address the licensing status. The individual could potentially continue to drive without a proper medical clearance, or if they are later found to be driving, the situation could be more complicated. It also fails to utilize the established regulatory channels designed to manage such situations comprehensively and fairly. Professional reasoning. Professionals encountering such situations should follow a structured decision-making process. First, identify the potential risk to public safety based on observable facts. Second, consult relevant regulations and policies, in this case, the Saskatchewan Driver's Licensing and Vehicle Registration Act and SGI guidelines regarding medical fitness to drive. Third, determine the appropriate reporting mechanism, which is SGI. Fourth, act promptly and ethically by initiating the formal reporting process, allowing the regulatory body to conduct its assessment. This ensures that actions are taken within the legal and ethical framework, prioritizing safety while respecting due process. Question 15. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a collision at an intersection with limited sight lines, coupled with a high severity of potential injury due to the speed limit on the approaching road. You are approaching this intersection in Saskatchewan, and the traffic light is currently yellow. Which of the following actions best demonstrates safe and legally compliant driving? Option A. Maintain your current speed and attempt to clear the intersection before the light turns red, as you have the right-of-way while the light is yellow. Option B. Reduce speed significantly, scan for hazards from all directions, and be prepared to stop if necessary, even if it means entering the intersection after the light turns red. Option C. Stop abruptly before the intersection, even if the light is yellow and the intersection appears clear, to avoid any potential risk. Option D. Proceed through the intersection at your current speed, assuming it is clear because the light is yellow. The correct answer is B. Reduce speed significantly, scan for hazards from all directions, and be prepared to stop if necessary, even if it means entering the intersection after the light turns red. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a collision at an intersection with limited sight lines, coupled with a high severity of potential injury due to the speed limit on the approaching road. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a driver to proactively assess and mitigate a foreseeable risk, rather than simply reacting to an immediate hazard. The driver must balance the need to proceed with caution against the potential for delaying other road users, all while adhering to Saskatchewan's traffic laws and safe driving principles. The best approach involves a defensive driving strategy that prioritizes safety and compliance. This means significantly reducing speed as the intersection is approached, actively scanning for potential hazards from all directions, and being prepared to stop if necessary, even if the light appears to be changing in the driver's favor. This aligns with Saskatchewan's Traffic Safety Act, which mandates drivers operate their vehicles in a safe manner and yield the right-of-way when necessary to avoid a collision. The principle of defensive driving, which is an implicit expectation of all licensed drivers, dictates anticipating the actions of others and being prepared for unexpected events. An incorrect approach would be to maintain speed and attempt to beat the changing light. This disregards the moderate likelihood of a collision indicated by the risk matrix and the high severity of potential injury. It violates the principle of operating a vehicle safely and fails to yield the right-of-way when a potential hazard exists, directly contravening the spirit and letter of traffic safety laws. Another incorrect approach would be to stop abruptly and unnecessarily before the intersection, even if the light is green. While seemingly cautious, this can create a hazard for following vehicles and disrupt traffic flow without a clear, immediate danger. Saskatchewan traffic laws expect drivers to proceed through intersections when safe and legally permitted, not to impede traffic without cause. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to assume that because the light is green, the intersection is clear. This demonstrates a lack of proactive hazard assessment and a failure to consider the potential for other drivers to run a red light or for pedestrians to enter the intersection unexpectedly. This passive approach ignores the moderate likelihood of a collision and the high severity of potential injury, failing to meet the standard of care expected of a Saskatchewan driver. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that includes 1. Hazard identification, recognizing potential risks based on environmental cues and traffic conditions. 2. Risk assessment, evaluating the likelihood and severity of identified hazards. 3. Strategy selection, choosing a driving maneuver that mitigates the assessed risk while adhering to traffic laws. 4. Execution and monitoring, implementing the chosen strategy and continuously reassessing the situation for new or changing risks. Question 16. The control framework reveals that while driving on a rural highway in Saskatchewan during a sudden downpour, visibility is significantly reduced and the road surface appears slick. You are approaching a section of the highway where the posted speed limit is 100 km/h. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure safety and compliance with Saskatchewan's traffic regulations? Option A. Brake erratically and swerve to avoid any perceived water accumulation on the road. Option B. Accelerate to pass slower vehicles to make up for lost time due to the rain. Option C. Reduce your speed significantly below the posted limit, increase your following distance, and be prepared to stop if necessary. Option D. Maintain the posted speed limit of 100 km/h as it is the legal maximum. The correct answer is C. Reduce your speed significantly below the posted limit, increase your following distance, and be prepared to stop if necessary. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where a driver's judgment is tested under conditions that deviate from ideal. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires the driver to apply their knowledge of Saskatchewan's traffic laws and safe driving practices in a dynamic and potentially hazardous environment, rather than a controlled test track. The driver must not only demonstrate technical proficiency, but also a nuanced understanding of risk assessment and responsible decision-making when faced with unexpected circumstances. Careful judgment is required to prioritize safety and compliance with regulations. The correct approach involves a proactive and cautious response that prioritizes safety and adherence to Saskatchewan's traffic laws. This means slowing down significantly, increasing following distance, and being prepared to stop if necessary, even if it means delaying arrival. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Saskatchewan Driver's Handbook's emphasis on defensive driving, which includes adjusting speed and position for conditions, and the fundamental principle of ensuring the safety of oneself and other road users. It demonstrates an understanding that road conditions can change rapidly, and that maintaining control of the vehicle and avoiding potential hazards is paramount. An incorrect approach would be to maintain the posted speed limit without adjusting for the reduced visibility and slippery road surface. This is professionally unacceptable because it disregards the explicit guidance in the Saskatchewan Driver's Handbook regarding adjusting speed for adverse weather and road conditions. Failing to do so significantly increases the risk of losing control of the vehicle, hydroplaning, or being unable to stop in time to avoid a hazard, thereby violating the duty of care owed to other road users and potentially contravening traffic regulations related to safe driving. Another incorrect approach would be to accelerate to pass slower vehicles, believing that doing so will compensate for lost time. This is professionally unacceptable as it demonstrates a severe misjudgment of risk and a disregard for safety. The reduced visibility and slippery conditions make passing maneuvers exceptionally dangerous, increasing the likelihood of a collision. This action directly contradicts the principles of defensive driving and the legal obligation to operate a vehicle safely, potentially leading to severe consequences. A further incorrect approach would be to become overly anxious and brake erratically or swerve. While the intention might be to avoid a perceived hazard, uncontrolled reactions can be as dangerous as inaction. This is professionally unacceptable because it indicates a lack of composure and an inability to apply learned driving techniques under pressure. Safe driving requires controlled inputs and a calm assessment of the situation, not panicked reactions that could lead to a loss of control or further endanger other road users. A professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a continuous assessment of the driving environment. This includes recognizing potential hazards, understanding the limitations of the vehicle and oneself, and making proactive adjustments to speed, position, and awareness. When faced with challenging conditions, the default should always be to err on the side of caution, prioritizing safety and compliance with traffic laws over maintaining a schedule. This involves anticipating the actions of other drivers and being prepared to react safely to unexpected events. Question 17. Process analysis reveals that while driving on a two-lane highway in Saskatchewan, you are in the right lane and wish to change to the left lane to overtake a slower vehicle ahead. As you begin to check your mirrors and signal, a vehicle that was previously out of sight in your left blind spot suddenly appears and is approaching rapidly. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Maintain your current lane, cancel your signal, and wait for a safe opportunity to change lanes once the approaching vehicle has passed. Option B. Brake sharply and remain in your lane, creating a hazard for vehicles behind you. Option C. Immediately change lanes, assuming the approaching vehicle will react to your maneuver. Option D. Accelerate to quickly complete the lane change before the approaching vehicle reaches you. The correct answer is A. Maintain your current lane, cancel your signal, and wait for a safe opportunity to change lanes once the approaching vehicle has passed. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to demonstrate not only knowledge of Saskatchewan's traffic laws, but also the ability to apply them in a dynamic, real-world situation. The examiner must assess the applicant's judgment and adherence to safety protocols, which are paramount for public safety on Saskatchewan roads. The challenge lies in evaluating the applicant's decision-making under pressure and their understanding of the nuances of defensive driving, particularly when faced with unexpected events. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves the applicant maintaining control of the vehicle, checking mirrors and blind spots, and signaling their intention to change lanes only when it is safe to do so, ensuring sufficient space between their vehicle and others. This aligns with Saskatchewan's Driver's Handbook and the principles of safe driving, emphasizing the importance of situational awareness and proactive safety measures before executing any maneuver. This approach prioritizes the safety of all road users by ensuring the lane change does not impede or endanger other traffic. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately change lanes without checking mirrors or blind spots, assuming the other vehicle will slow down. This is a direct violation of safe driving practices and the principles of defensive driving taught in Saskatchewan. It demonstrates a lack of situational awareness and a disregard for the safety of other drivers, potentially leading to a collision. Another incorrect approach is to brake abruptly and remain in the current lane, becoming hesitant and impeding traffic flow. While braking might be necessary in some situations, a complete failure to assess the lane change opportunity or to proceed when safe, even after signaling, shows a lack of confidence and an inability to make timely, safe decisions, which is a critical skill for licensed drivers in Saskatchewan. A further incorrect approach is to accelerate aggressively to quickly enter the lane ahead of the other vehicle. This is an unsafe and aggressive driving behavior that can create a dangerous situation for both the applicant and the other driver, potentially forcing the other driver to brake suddenly or swerve. This demonstrates poor judgment and a lack of respect for established traffic courtesies and safety margins. Professional reasoning. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety, adherence to regulations, and the assessment of risk. This involves understanding the core principles of the Saskatchewan Driver's Handbook, evaluating the immediate environment, anticipating potential hazards, and making decisions that minimize risk to oneself and others. In a testing scenario, the examiner is looking for evidence of these skills, not just rote memorization of rules. Question 18. System analysis indicates a driver is approaching a clearly marked school zone in Regina, Saskatchewan, during the posted active hours for the zone. The driver observes the 30 km/h speed limit sign for the school zone, but does not see any children immediately present on the sidewalks or crossing the street. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant action for the driver to take? Option A. Continue at the normal speed limit until children are directly observed. Option B. Immediately reduce speed to 30 km/h and proceed with caution, prepared to stop if necessary. Option C. Assume the school zone is inactive and proceed at the normal speed limit since no children are visible. Option D. Stop the vehicle until children are observed to ensure maximum safety. The correct answer is B. Immediately reduce speed to 30 km/h and proceed with caution, prepared to stop if necessary. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the driver to make an immediate decision under pressure, balancing personal convenience with strict adherence to Saskatchewan's traffic laws regarding school zones. Misinterpreting or disregarding the signage can lead to serious safety risks for children and significant legal consequences for the driver. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance and public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves immediately reducing speed and proceeding with extreme caution, prepared to stop if necessary, upon entering the designated school zone, regardless of whether children are immediately visible. This aligns with Section 136 of the Traffic Safety Act of Saskatchewan, which mandates that drivers must reduce their speed to a maximum of 30 km/h in a school zone when children may be present. The presence of school zone signage itself indicates the potential for children's presence, necessitating a proactive safety measure. This approach prioritizes the safety of vulnerable road users, which is a fundamental ethical and legal obligation for all drivers in Saskatchewan. Incorrect approaches analysis. Proceeding at the normal speed limit until children are actually seen is an incorrect approach because it relies on reactive rather than proactive safety measures. The law requires a reduction in speed upon entering the zone, not when a hazard is immediately apparent. This failure to comply with the mandated speed reduction violates Section 136 of the Traffic Safety Act and creates an unacceptable risk to children who may emerge unexpectedly. Stopping only if a child is directly in the path of the vehicle is also an incorrect approach. This is a dangerously reactive stance that ignores the spirit and letter of the law, which aims to prevent accidents by creating a safer environment before a potential hazard arises. This approach demonstrates a disregard for the precautionary principle embedded in traffic safety legislation and could lead to severe consequences. Assuming the zone is inactive because no children are visible is an incorrect approach. School zone regulations are typically in effect during specific hours, and the signage indicates these hours. The absence of visible children at a particular moment does not negate the legal requirement to adhere to the reduced speed limit within the designated zone and its active hours. This assumption bypasses the legal obligation and compromises safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes safety and legal compliance. This involves 1. Recognizing and understanding all traffic signage, especially those related to safety zones like school zones. 2. Proactively adhering to posted speed limits and safety requirements upon entering such zones, even if the immediate threat is not apparent. 3. Prioritizing the safety of vulnerable road users above personal convenience. 4. Consulting and understanding relevant provincial traffic legislation, such as the Traffic Safety Act of Saskatchewan, to ensure informed and lawful driving practices. Question 19. Governance review demonstrates that a new resident in Regina, Saskatchewan, who recently relocated from Alberta, is preparing for their Saskatchewan driver's license knowledge test. They recall the general principles of driving, but are unsure if all road signs and traffic laws are identical to those they learned in Alberta. What is the most appropriate and professionally responsible course of action for this individual to ensure they are adequately prepared for the Saskatchewan knowledge test? Option A. Actively study the official Saskatchewan Driver's Handbook and any supplementary learning materials provided by Saskatchewan Government Insurance (SGI) or the Saskatchewan Ministry of Highways. Option B. Focus on general driving principles and common sense, believing that specific provincial regulations are unlikely to present significant challenges. Option C. Attempt the Saskatchewan driver's license knowledge test without specific preparation, trusting that their prior driving experience will be sufficient. Option D. Rely on their existing knowledge of Alberta's driving rules, assuming that most traffic laws are consistent across Canadian provinces. The correct answer is A. Actively study the official Saskatchewan Driver's Handbook and any supplementary learning materials provided by Saskatchewan Government Insurance (SGI) or the Saskatchewan Ministry of Highways. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Saskatchewan driver's license applicant who has recently moved from Alberta. The challenge lies in accurately understanding and applying Saskatchewan's specific traffic laws and road signage, which may differ from those in their previous province. Navigating these differences is crucial for demonstrating competency and ensuring road safety, as provincial regulations govern driving practices. Careful judgment is required to identify and internalize these distinctions, rather than assuming familiarity. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves actively seeking out and studying the official Saskatchewan Driver's Handbook and any supplementary materials provided by Saskatchewan Government Insurance, SGI, or the Saskatchewan Ministry of Highways. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the regulatory requirement to be knowledgeable about the specific laws and rules of the road in Saskatchewan. Relying on official, jurisdiction-specific documentation ensures that the applicant is learning from the authoritative source, thereby meeting the legal and safety standards mandated for obtaining a driver's license in Saskatchewan. This proactive learning demonstrates a commitment to understanding and adhering to local regulations. Incorrect approaches analysis. Relying solely on memory of Alberta's driving rules is professionally unacceptable because it fails to acknowledge and address the potential differences in Saskatchewan's traffic laws, signage, and procedures. This could lead to a misunderstanding of critical regulations, potentially resulting in a failed test or, more importantly, unsafe driving practices on Saskatchewan roads. Assuming that driving rules are universally identical across Canadian provinces is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Attempting to wing it during the test by guessing answers based on general driving knowledge is also professionally unacceptable. This approach demonstrates a lack of preparation and a disregard for the formal testing process designed to ensure driver competency and adherence to Saskatchewan's specific legal framework. It undermines the integrity of the licensing system and poses a risk to public safety. Failing to review any materials and instead hoping that prior driving experience will be sufficient is professionally unacceptable. While experience is valuable, it does not substitute for knowledge of specific provincial regulations. This approach neglects the fundamental requirement of demonstrating understanding of Saskatchewan's unique driving environment as outlined by its governing bodies. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing this situation should employ a systematic approach to learning and preparation. This involves 1. Identifying the specific jurisdiction's requirements, Saskatchewan. 2. Locating and thoroughly reviewing the official regulatory documentation, Saskatchewan Driver's Handbook. 3. Actively engaging with the material, noting any differences from prior knowledge. 4. Practicing with official or representative materials to assess understanding. 5. Approaching the test with confidence derived from thorough preparation, not assumption. Question 20. Strategic planning requires a commercial vehicle operator in Saskatchewan to accurately report their fuel consumption for a recent trip. The vehicle consumed 450 liters of fuel over a distance of 200 kilometers. What is the vehicle's fuel consumption in liters per 100 kilometers, rounded to one decimal place? Option A, 67 liters per 100 kilometers. Option B, 375 liters per 100 kilometers. Option C, 5 liters per 100 kilometers. Option D, 266, 7 liters per 100 kilometers. The correct answer is C, 5 liters per 100 kilometers. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge involving the accurate calculation of fuel consumption for a commercial vehicle operating in Saskatchewan. The challenge lies in ensuring the calculation is not only mathematically sound, but also aligns with the regulatory requirements for reporting fuel efficiency, which can impact licensing, permits, and potentially environmental compliance. Miscalculations can lead to incorrect reporting, fines, or operational inefficiencies. Careful judgment is required to select the appropriate formula and apply it correctly using the provided data. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves using the standard formula for calculating fuel consumption in liters per 100 kilometers, which is the accepted metric for reporting in Saskatchewan and many other jurisdictions. This approach involves dividing the total fuel consumed by the distance traveled and then multiplying by 100. This method directly addresses the requirement to quantify fuel efficiency in a universally understood format. The Saskatchewan Driver's Handbook and related provincial regulations implicitly support standardized reporting of vehicle performance metrics, and this calculation method is the most direct and compliant way to achieve that. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to simply divide the distance traveled by the fuel consumed. This would yield kilometers per liter, which is a measure of fuel economy, but not the standard reporting metric for fuel consumption in Saskatchewan. This failure to adhere to the prescribed reporting format could lead to misinterpretation by regulatory bodies. Another incorrect approach would be to calculate fuel consumption in gallons per mile, as this uses imperial units that are not standard for reporting in Saskatchewan's regulatory framework. This would require an unnecessary conversion step and deviate from the expected metric. A further incorrect approach would be to only consider the fuel consumed without factoring in the distance traveled. This would not provide any measure of efficiency and would be entirely irrelevant for reporting fuel consumption. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach this situation by first identifying the required reporting metric for fuel consumption in Saskatchewan. They should then select the appropriate mathematical formula that directly calculates this metric using the provided data. Verification of the calculation and ensuring the units are correct according to provincial standards are crucial final steps.